Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the 13th chapter of Mark's Gospel. We're going to try and take it all the way up until the 23rd verse. There are 5 main things that are communicated in this chapter. Virtually all of it is underlined in red. These are the words of the Savior himself, and he prophesies of the temple's destructions. He gives warnings of false deceivers and false signs pertaining to the end times. He sets it straight. He gives them the description of when the Son of Man will come. Then he imparts the lesson of a fig tree. Then he concludes with an exhortation to watchfulness. We're going to cover the first two, the temple's destruction being foretold, and also the signs which we present-day disciples need to be mindful of. But before we do that, we just got to briefly discuss the 12th chapter, which sets the narrative context. We read of 6 things in this chapter, and whereas the 13th chapter is a monologue, it is one speech, there are 6 different discussions and interactions with different people. The first of which is the parable of the tenants, the second of which is the question of paying taxes to Caesar, the third of which is the question of marriage and the resurrection, the fourth of which is the greatest commandments, and then the fifth of which he answers whose son he is in the temple, and then he notes on the widow's offering. We're just going to briefly review what we'll get more dense in our concentration towards the latter end, but the parable of the tenants is an unflattering report card of Israel's history of killing the God-sent prophets in their midst. So they're likened to servants of the owner of a vineyard who sends his servants to check on the robbers who had taken it, fleeced it, beat the servants, and then eventually kill him. So he says, I will send my son. And this is the history of Israel. They had virtually persecuted, and if not killed, all the prophets whose existence were not testament to their righteousness, but of their wickedness. The fact that they were even necessary to enforce the covenant, which the people led astray from, was that. But they were ready to kill him, and they wanted to kill him, and that much is made plain in the 12th verse. And they were seeking to seize him, but feared the crowd, for they knew he had spoken the parable against them. And leaving him, they went away. So he was in control of the crowd. He had expert crowd management skills. So oftentimes we see the dichotomy and division of reception between the crowd in the synagogue or anywhere else, whether it's out in the open, and the religious rulers always have some nitpicking peccadillo for which they are ready to kill him for. They were serious, but they were unable to do so because the crowd was clearly in his corner. Next of which is paying taxes to Caesar. This question was asked by an unusual combination of factions, the Herodians and the Pharisees. The Pharisees were proud patriots. The Herodians were Gentile sellouts. They owed their position to Rome. So the Pharisees, they asked the question about paying taxes to Caesar, and many self-righteous Pharisees would have prided themselves on tithing all that they have and all that they owned while not paying the tax to Caesar. But the Herodians, of course, would have wanted to, but he says it's not, whose inscription is on that coin. And so he says to them, give to Caesar's what is Caesar's, and to Elohim what is Elohim's. And they marveled at him. So this establishes the Christian's perspective on the legitimacy of government. It's legitimate, but it is limited. So we observe the division of church and state, as we call it today. And this was the natural existence of the church until Constantine wedded it to the state inextricably, until the Baptists launched the movement in America, which successfully culminated in the passage of the First Amendment in their Bill of Rights. The next of which is presented to him by Sadducees. They were distinct from their Pharisees in their lack of belief in the resurrection. So they ask him a question about a woman who was married to 7 brothers in succession, each of whom die, and they want to know whose wife is he going to be at the resurrection. And he charges them of not knowing the scriptures. For when they rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as angels in the heavens. So marriage, as we know it as an institution, is not going to exist or even be necessary in heaven. And he chides them for not believing in the doctrine of the resurrection, when they had the implicit inference in how Yahweh delivered himself to Moses in the bush, as I am the Elohim of Abraham and the Elohim of Isaac and the Elohim of Jacob. He is not the Elohim of the dead, but Elohim of the living. You then go greatly astray. So he was still, even though these patriarchs had been dead for some 400 years, Yahweh assures him in the burning bush that he is the same Elohim of their patriarchs who are alive and in his presence. So they are resurrected. So that there's the doctrine of the resurrection right there. He's not I was but it's the tension of the declension is significant. So it's I am that indicates an ongoing perpetuity. Next is the question of the two greatest commandments, and there is no debate or scholarly controversy which was more exciting than this one in the contemporary rabbinical circles, but he gives the most succinct answer possible. The first of all commandments is, Hear, O Israel, Yahweh our Elohim, Yahweh is one. So what's different about Mark's account that we don't read in Matthew's is that Matthew opens with Deuteronomy 6:5. Mark includes Deuteronomy 6:4. This is known as the Shema, and it leads into 6:5. And you shall love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart and with all your beings and with all your mind and with all your strength. This is the first command. And the second like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. So the unbreakable bond is the principle of love. We are to love Yahweh and we are to love our fellow man. And the greater we love the nucleus of our love, the source of all love, the source from whom all love emanates and springs, he is love embodied in essence and attributes, then we will have the capacity to love our neighbor, but we have to love him with all our faculties and all our capacities, mind, heart, soul, gut, everything, and the rest. And what's also unique in Mark's presentation of this, first off, Luke has one of the scholars who's tempting him with a question in the 10th chapter in the Great Samaritan parable. One of the lawyers gives the same answer. But this teacher affirms the correctness and the profundity of his wisdom. So he had entered in at the behest of the party line. He was trying to trap him. The religious rulers were forever trying to entice him into some doubtful utterance of reproach, according to which they could indict him according to their own or Roman law. And so that's what the taxes was all about. They wanted him to say, pay no taxes, so they could turn the Romans loose against them. And Yahshua said that he answered wisely and said to him, you are not far from the kingdom of heaven. And after that, no one dared to question him. So he successfully he controls the outcome of the debate from start to finish. He successfully silences all the opposition. He just systematically destroyed all of these people who were trying to destroy him. And then he's in the temple, so this places us in the temple, which is going to form the comparison of the location in the Mount Olivet discourse. We'll explain more on that when we get there. But he answers, whose son he is, and he explains his relationship as the son of David and the son of Yahweh. And he tells them to beware of the scribes. These were the self-righteous people, the publicity hounds for their own acts of devotion and righteousness. And that concept of being aware, beware, he says in many times, watch, be aware, be alert, be awake for these unfoldings, which are the end times, which we are approaching. And then the chapter closes with a widow who all these people were giving coins in the tax out of their abundant, and this woman who was poor and had nothing, 2 small coins, the equivalent of a quarter, and calling near his disciples, he said to them, truly I say to you that this poor widow has put in more than all these putting into the treasury, for they all put in out of their excess, but she out of the poverty put in all that she had, her entire livelihood. So he's telling them that if you give what you have, but if you're tithing 100% and you are poor, then that is more meaningful and valuable and a greater sacrifice than if you are rich and giving 1% or even 10%. So this widow gave all that she had. That was an act of faithfulness, and of course the temple system was corrupt, but she did it anyway as an act of faith. This takes us to the opening verse of the 13th chapter, Mark's Gospel lesson itself. And as he went out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, Teacher, see what stones and what buildings. So the temple was, he had just cleared out the temple in the 11th chapter. He violently expelled all the moneymakers who had turned his father's house into a temple of Mammon. But the disciple who said this, it's not identified as to who he is, but he's just marveling at the physical structure of the temple, even though he had just witnessed that it had been corrupt inside, as evidenced by his clearing out. And the buildings, now the stones on the buildings, according to Josephus, the reputable and most trusted and expert secular historian of ancient Jewry, the temples on the building were white, and they were as long as 37 feet, as high as 12 feet, and as long as 18 feet wide. This was a standard building block for what he was talking about. So just imagine that, and the temple that has been visually reconstructing in certain films is stunning to look at. It is a work of wonder in architecture, but it's all going to be gone. That's what he's pointing up to. And Yahshua answering said to him, Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone shall be left upon another at all, which shall not be thrown down. So even though it looks resplendent and radiant and powerful and immortal right now, it is all vanity. It is all going to disintegrate within their lifetimes. He is in the final week of his life. He is days away from death when he says this. So, but they all lived. The year 70 A.D. was a cataclysmic year in ancient Judaism. That represented the second destruction of their nation. They rebelled in the year 66 AD, so zealots and these false messiahs who claimed to come in him were alive and well in that age. So there's also a double meaning to the prophecies of the time of the ends. We'll explain more on that when we get there. And as he sat on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him separately. So the Mount of Olives is east of Jerusalem. It's 2,700 feet tall, which places it 200 feet atop Mount Zion. So it has a magnificent view of the temple that they are all beholding. And the disciples are identified by name. These are the two pairs of brothers. Peter and Andrew were brothers. They're not presented in that. But James and John were the sons of Zebedee. Peter and Andrew, they were all fishermen and all brothers, and all the three of them, excluding Andrew, were his inner entourage of elite disciples, the most trusted one. So he says a lot to them, and they witnessed the transfiguration, for example. So these really have the intimate access that the nine lack, and Andrew is included in this one. Say to us, when shall these be, and what shall be the sign when all this is going to be accomplished? So they want to know when, and they want to know how, and he doesn't answer the question directly, but they did certainly live to witness the thing. But he expands upon this into a double prophecy, which is pertinent to their own age as well as our own. This is the end times encroaching upon us, and we are given signs, we are given misleading signs, and there's going to be prolific deception as these events unfold. So he sets the record straight. So we Bible-believing Christians are not at a disadvantage when these events come and unfold as they are predicted. And Yahshua began to say to them, Take heed that no one leads you astray. So the potentiality to be led astray would necessitate this warning. So when he is no longer with them, there's going to be rival claimants who claim to be him, and he tells them, don't go there. He gives them the signs and the warning. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am he, and they shall lead many astray. Now there were plenty of messianic pretenders in the years prior to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. There was a messianic mania, and it was ultimately, they styled themselves as military messiahs. This messiah was something different, and he was killed for it. He was killed by his own people, but most of these messianic pretenders would have instantly evaporated against the might of the Roman Empire, whom they waged war against. They did not have the resources, they did not have the manpower, they did not have the strategic capability to undertake their Gentile oppressors. So they paid the price for their own foolishness with being strapped away, but many false pretenders are going to come in the days that lie ahead. It could be you're in my lifetime, not ringing any alarm bells. I'm just trying to maintain the watchfulness with the integrity that the Master communicates us to do in this chapter. And when you hear of fightings and rumors of fightings, do not be troubled. It has to take place, but the end is not yet. So the rumors of war, there would have been talk of the town, all the gossip about the latest zealot uprising and rebellion and leading. The reality of rumors of war would have been alive in their generation, and so too is it in ours. We are literally in the midst of a rumored war with Iran at the filming of us. You can check the date on the bottom screen. Not too long ago, General Soleimani was killed in a surgical, brilliant military execution, but we don't want to get distracted by that. It just goes to say that we are living in these times because rumors of war have been a reality since the Cold War. It took off since then. Since then, the threat of atomic warfare has been as potent in the geopolitical chessboard as is actual war in certain places. But don't be troubled. We should not be off guard. I have serene confidence in the outcome of that. First off, it's not going to be World War III. Anyone who says otherwise is just a coward and a demagogue. And the end is not yet. So, the end of the world, Armageddon, is not going to happen because of the unfoldings or machinations of what's going on in Iran right now. But, we'll see what happens with that situation. I do pray for peace, but, there's only so much that a nation can take without retaliating. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be earthquakes in various places, and there shall be famines of food and disturbances. These are the beginning of birth pains. So accompanying the geopolitical chaos where there is no balance of power, no stable one anyway, there is constant nations and upsurge and rebellion against others, and this reality is reflected in the parallel form with the natural calamities that are the abnormal activity has really taken off. I think the statistics of the numbers of earthquakes that have occurred since the year 1700 have dwarfed any century since then, or any time and location. So this accelerated activities. Now, don't believe the false prophets of the global warming movement. According to Al Gore, the polar ice caps already melted some 7 years ago. These people are quacks and phonies. But there is a theological explanation for the abnormal natural activity, but don't look for your prophecy and meaning in the bankrupt substitute religion of environmentalism. And the famines and disturbances, these are just the facts of life. These are the way of the world in that moment in time, and these are only the beginning of birth pains. The birth pains is used as a term to express the suffering which must precede the messianic arrival. But take heed to yourselves, for they shall deliver you up to councils and to synagogues. You shall be beaten, and you shall be brought before rulers and kings for my sake, for a witness to them. So he wants them to know no illusions, no phony gimmicks about what they're getting into. Once he's gone, they will be. If he was dragged to as an accused criminal to the council of the Sanhedrin and the synagogue, so too would they. And they were going to be beaten and scourged. I think 39 lashes was the legal limitation because 40 you approach death. So that was a common faith. But the entire reason that they're there is to give a witness to the kings to whom you have to answer to for my sake. So it's not for your sake. Don't take it personal that you're being dragged into the court for your witness. It is always and only about him. His sake is what gives the martyr the path of the martyr, or the persecution, virtuous merit. And the good news has to be proclaimed first to all the nations. So we're not quite there yet. The Bible is banned in 52 countries at the filming of this, so it is not being proclaimed across the world. We are being stifled in our successful global evangelism by repressive, communist, and Islamo-fascist governments. They're the ones who are banning them. So we do have a little ways to go, but that doesn't mean, we have to get there, and everything must unfold according to this wise and grand and benevolent purpose. And when they lead you away and deliver you up, do not worry beforehand what you are to say, but whatever is given to you in that hour, speak that, for it is not you who are speaking, but the Ruach Kadesh. So preparation is the default state of mind for us. If we were going before a ruler, we would labor intensively to answer for his sake we would labor intensively in preparation to be prepared for what we might say. We might imagine a dozen conceivable anticipations of what they might say and frame our answer around that. We would be overworking ourselves with mental gymnastics. It would be consuming our thoughts. But to them, to the disciples, and if we are in a similar situation, what is true for them is true for what is true for disciples past is almost always true for disciples present and future. So they have the promise that the word on their tongue will be supplied in that moment by the Spirit himself, and that is better than anything they could come up with on their own resources. He will instantly arrive and transform the words of your tongue into a potent evangelical witness. And brother shall deliver up brother to death, and a father his child, and children shall rise up against parents, and shall put them to death. So once more, the Messiah offers no phony gimmicks or any illusions as to precisely the cost of following him will be. He came to bring the sword. The division of his message would divide families, and it's going to intensify in the days ahead, where the temptation to betray others, just for being Christian, because those who are in the beast system will want to betray, rat each other's out and put them to death. So the witness becomes real when the death becomes, possible. Right now, the persecution we face in the United States of America, we have no chance or possibility of legally being put to death for the proclamation of our witness. But, when the United States of America is no more under the beast one world system, that will be a fact of life, which we must have to contend with. And you shall be hated by all because of my name, but he who shall have endured to the end, he shall be saved. So they're not hated because they're unlikable people. They're not popular because they bring a message which is the condemnation of the world, and that's why they are hated. The cross is an offense because it is the condemnation of the world, and we have no right or reasonable expectation to expect the world that we are trying to save not to hate us when we are walking in his ways, because as he said, the disciple is not above his master. So if the world hated him, then it's going to hate us all generations since. But if you endure to the end, through the hatred and the hostility, if you don't, so the element of endurance is salvifically significant. The same shall be saved, or he shall be saved. So if we endure to the end, there's no such thing as once saved, always saved. The process of salvation it's simple, but it's a lot more complex than getting on one's knees once and accepting the Savior into your heart. You have to endure to the end you have to maintain the integrity of the born-again experience all the way till the end, till death and beyond. And if you want to be saved, there's no shortcuts to salvation. He who endures to the end with all the hatred and hostility because of his name by the world and from the world, then we will be saved. And when you see the abomination that lays waste, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, put up where it should not be, he who reads, let him understand. Then those who are in Judah flee to the mountains. So the abomination was foretold by Daniel, and once again there is a prophetic echo which is not limited to a single generation. What Daniel spoke of came to pass under the rule of the sadistic tyrant Antiochus IV around the year in the 3rd century before Messiah, the 200s, but also this is alluded to by Paul in 2 Thessalonians 2:4, that the final and ultimate act of mankind's rebellion will be when a satanically indwelled man sits on the throne in the temple in Jerusalem. The temple will be built, most likely in your and my lifetimes, and he will declare himself God. And that is the abomination. He's going to set up his image to be worshipped. And when that happens, if you're in Judah, get out of there, because Judah is right in the territory of the temple. That's going to be the place where he sets himself up for worship, this end times dictator. So that is the meaning of the abomination of Daniel. The abomination that Antiochus did was he slaughtered pigs to Father Zeus on the sacred temple. Pigs were filthy animals. That was a direct insult, an intentional one to the Jewish people. But the abomination is going to be the image, which is going to be exalted in the temple, which doesn't belong to him, and he's going to claim something to be something he's not. He's going to usurp God, because he is satanically indwelled, and that's the rebellion of Satan, and it's mimicked in every one of us whenever we declare ourselves to be the moral arbiters in our life. We are saying we don't need God. And he was on the housetop. Let him not come down into the house, for to come in to take whatever out of his house. So this is going to be a crisis and emergency situation. You're not going to have the luxury of gathering all your things once this calamity comes. It's going to be sudden, and there's going to be no turning back. So you got to get with it. You got to be prepared for that day arrives, because there will be no additional preparations. You won't have the luxury once it comes. And he was in the field. Let him not go back to get his cloak. So if you need an extra layer, and it could be winter, as he says in the next verse, too bad. You got to learn to live without it. And woe to those who are pregnant and to those nursing children in those days. So it's going to be a curse if you have any physical obstacle or barrier to efficiently running away and taking cover and staying away from the calamity. If you have a child, if you have a child in your belly, or if a child is just born, you're going to be out of luck when that day comes. And pray that your flight does not take place in winter. So winter is the season of year that is least conducive to efficient movement. That's when it's cold and we are restricted physically by the sting of the bite of winter, so it bites on our flesh, and we cannot travel as far or as fast as we would like. And if we left our cloak behind, we're not going to make it very far. For in those days there shall be distress, such as has not been from the beginning of creation, which Elohim created until this time, nor even shall be. So this is going to be something without precedent, without parallel, without duplication. There's literally going to be nothing like it, such as has not been from the beginning of creation. So this is going to be a once in a lifetime, once in a history degree of calamity. This distress, this tribulation is going to be nothing like we know. When we speak of persecution, I'm glad to bear the ridicule and reproach of the world. That's part of my job. But to be put my head on the faith, I'd like to think I wouldn't have a split second's hesitation, but that's something that can only be proven once it is brought to the test. And if the master had not shortened those days, no flesh would have been saved. But because of the chosen ones whom he chose, he shortened these days. So there is a limitation on how long it's going to last, and it's all under his control, his hand, his guidance. And he is concerned for the elect, because in Matthew's account, some of these false messiahs who are alluded to, we'll take it all the way up to there, are going to deceive, if possible, even the very elect. So there comes a breaking point even for the elect. The elect are those who are secure in their salvation, but they're going to be put to the ringer. They're going to test the sincerity of their salvation. They're going to be put to the test when that comes. And if anyone says to you, look, here is the Messiah, or look there, do not believe it. So there's going to be plenty of people pointing in false directions, leading people astray. The people are going to be looking for the ark of safety and refuge in these calamities that are consuming and ripping the world up all around them and all over them and everything else. But don't believe it. How can we be sure? And we'll know when he gets here. This brings us to the coming of the Son of Man. In Matthew's account, it's going to be like lightning from the east onto the west. So nobody's going to miss it. So don't believe anyone who says it. Believe it when these signs come to be. We'll pick that up in the next chapter. For false messiahs and false prophets shall rise and show signs and wonders to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. So the false Messiah and the false prophet, these are not the singular tense, but these are plural. So before the two beasts of Revelation 13, the muscle of the satanic operation in that division of labor, Satan is the mind, the false the anti-Messiah is going to be the muscle, and the false prophet is going to be the mouthpiece. But before they come to pass, there's going to be several pretenders, and they're going to deceive many through satanic supernaturalism. So we have to read Deuteronomy 13 for the principles of not being a sucker for satanic supernaturalism. People are not going to believe in miracles. The majority of the world is skeptical to the possibility of miracles, but from that blank foundation, they're going to fall sucker and prey to these false prophets and false messiahs who are going to lead them astray through the sheer wonder of miraculous power. And you take heed. See, I have warned you of it all. So this concludes on a somewhat similar note as the chapter itself concludes, an exhortation to watchfulness. This is the second of the 5 things. So what we'll cover in the next lesson is the coming of the Son of Man, the lesson of the fig tree, and the exhortation to watchfulness. And our 4 evangelical duties as the end time approach are 4 W's. Watch, witness, work, wait. Waiting is not passive. We have to work while we wait, and we have to be mindful. We have to watch in order to witness. So from the witnessing comes the watching. We witness what we watch, and we share what we witness. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.